Continue with question 11. The following are explanation on the cell cycle by two biology students. Let's look at what they say. Synthesis of cells occurs including the formations of new organelle. So new organelle is the key points. The rate of cell metabolism is very high. Okay, so what is the phase explained by the student? Now, to explain this question, we must put all the phases in the cell cycle in the sequence. So let's say we have the G1. G1 is the first phase of the cell cycle, continue with S, continue with G2 phase, and continue with M phase. Now, G1 phase is so-called the growth phase. In this phase, they will start to form the organelle, for example, mitochondrion, like the endoplasmic reticulum. And what happens in the S phase and G2 phase? For S phase, DNA replication. The DNA will be replicate themselves to form the second sets of the DNA. G2 phase is the growth phase 2. Normally their metabolism rate is still high, but they will not produce any new organelle because they want to save energy. Why they want to save energy? Because they are going to prepare for cell division. And this cell division occurs in the M phase. Cell division, they need a lot of energy. That's why G2 phase, the cell will not produce any new organelle. Okay guys, come to question 12. The statements below refer to the technique in agriculture. For your information, this topic also cannot be found in KSSM textbook anymore. Alright, so let's start. Explant. What is explant? Now, try to imagine that you have a plant that you want to clone. If you want to clone the cell, you must get their DNA, am I right? But for this technique, we are not going to get the DNA. Instead, we need to get the cell of this plant. So we cut out a part of this plant, okay? And this part of the plant is known as the explant. And we are going to put this explant into a test tube. Inside a test tube, we have the agar, which is the culture medium. Culture medium is actually the nutrients for the explant. So we are going to put the explant inside the medium. Of course, to make sure the explant can survive, this medium must be sterile. Sterile means it is free of microorganisms. So once the explant absorbs the nutrients from the culture medium, they will divide themselves into a piece of tissue. And this piece of tissue, we no longer call it as explant. Instead, we call it as the callus. So this callus, eventually it will form into a young plant. And this young plant, it looks exactly or identical to the parent's plant. So we call this technique as cloning. Sometime in your textbook or in your exam, you will see we don't call it as cloning, but instead we call it as a plant tissue culture. Sometimes people call it as tissue culture as well. So tissue culture and plant tissue culture, they are the same technique. Alright, so let's continue. Question 13. Incomplete digestion of food could happen in human if the body temperature is 40 degrees. Why? Because our normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. And this 37 degrees Celsius is the optimum temperature for enzyme to digest the food. If our body temperature is more than 37 degrees Celsius, then the enzyme can no longer work their best to digest the food. So the digestion of food will be slowed down. And the incomplete digestion might occur due to high body temperature. That's why when you're fever, you don't feel like want to eat anything, right? Because your enzyme is trying to tell you they cannot work very well. Okay, look at question 14. Diagram 10 shows organism PQR. P is the epiphytic plants. Epi means on. So these plants, they will grow on the other's plant. Why they want to grow on the other plants? Because they are too short. They want to gain some height in order to get enough sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. Now, I say photosynthesis because they are having the chlorophyll to produce their own nutrients. So they no need to absorb the nutrient from the host. Next organism, fungus. So this mushroom, they get their nutrients from the dead organism. Normally, they decompose the dead organism and absorb the nutrients from it. For organisms are, normally they will live in the soil that is lack of nitrogen. So to get enough nitrogen to survive or for growth, so this organism will digest the insect to get the nitrogen from them. So they are the carnivorous plants. Now let's look at the questions. Classify the organism according to the types of the nutrients. So P is able to do photosynthesis. They are able to produce their own food. So the answer is photoautotroph. A and B remove. Q is the fungus. It decomposes other organisms to get the nutrients. We call this type of nutrition as saprophytism. So parasitism is wrong. So we remove C. Now, what is holozoic? Holozoic nutrition means they will digest someone to get the nutrient from someone. So this answer should be D. Okay, let's move on to question 15. Table 1 shows the result obtained in an experiment to determine the energy value in the groundnut. So calculate the energy value in the groundnut. To calculate the energy value in the groundnut, we are going to use the formula. So the formula is energy value, the mass of the water times the temperature rises times the specific heat capacity times 4.2, which is the specific heat capacity of the water. Now, we find out the totals, divide the value with the mass of food times 1000. Why you want to times 1000? Because you want to convert it into kJ. Okay, so let's do the math. Mass of H2O. For water, 15 ml equals to 15 gram. So the mass of water is equals to 15 gram. The temperature rises is about 55 degrees Celsius times 4.2, which is the specific heat capacity of water, divided by the mass of the food, which is 0.7 gram times 1000. So from here, you do the calculation, you will get the answer 4.95 kilojoule per gram. So this is the final answer. For those who can't really memorize the formula, I have a trick for you. Now, remember, anything that is related to water, you put on top of the formula. Anything that's not related to water, you just put below. Okay? Now, you see, 15 gram is the mass of the water. We put on top of it. 55 degrees Celsius is the temperature increase in the water. Related to water, we put on top of it. 4.2 is the specific heat capacity of water. Related to water, we put on top of the formula. Alright? So this is the tricks. Now move on to the question 16. Question 16. The chemical equations below shows parts of reactions in the photosynthesis. Basically, 24 H2O will be 24 hydrogen ion and 24 hydroxyl ion. This process is known as photolysis. Let's look at the questions. What will happen to the hydroxyl ion when it loses electron? So hydroxyl ion is the OH minus. So this OH minus, when it loses the electron, it will form the oxygen and also the hydroxyl group. So the answer should be 3 and 4. Donkey. Question 17. Diagram 11 shows two methods to overcome obesity. Now, what is obesity? Obesity means someone is overweight. Alright, so let's look at method 1. X diet. So this X diet, it depends on the low intake of carbohydrate. So what's the meaning of low intake of carbohydrate? Means you will reduce the glucose intake. For method Y, method Y will reduce the intestinal length. This is a type of surgery. This surgery is going to cut your intestine. So let's say this is your small intestines. The doctor is going to cut out. So by cutting the small intestines, the nutrients absorptions will be reduced because the length of the intestine is being reduced. Alright, so let's look at the questions. Which of the following health problems are caused by this method? Now, X diet, since we are taking less glucose into our body, so eventually the concentration of glucose in blood will be reduced, and this will cause a disease called the hypoglycemia. Now, what is the meaning of hypoglycemia? Hypo means less. Glycemia means the glucose dissolved in blood. It fits the condition here when the concentration of glucose in blood reduces. So the answer is D. Okay, so let's look at why. Since we are reducing the nutrient absorptions into our body, it will cause the deficiency of nutrients. So eventually, the answer for this question is D. What is hyperglycemia? Hyper means more. Glycemia means glucose in blood. When you have too much of glucose inside the blood, we will call it as a hyperglycemia. How about diabetes insipidus? Diabetes insipidus means it tends to pee a lot. Because of that, you lose a lot of water, you keep on feeling thirsty. So this is what we call the diabetes insipidus. Diagram 12 shows an organelle in a plant cell. This whole organelle is called the chloroplast. And inside the chloroplast, we have this structure Q. This structure Q is called the granum. Now, what is the effect of damage on structure Q towards the functions of the organelle? If the structure Q is damaged, that means no photosynthesis can be carried out. Now remember, what is the chemical reaction for photosynthesis? CO2 plus H2O will produce oxygen plus glucose with the help of light and chloroplast. So let's say granum is damaged, so chloroplast is damaged. CO2 cannot be taken into the leaf to convert it into glucose, so the number of CO2 will increase. Oxygen level will decrease and glucose will be decreased. So the answer for this question should be A. The concentration of carbon dioxide gas increases. But why the answer is not C? More water molecules are produced. This reaction will not produce the water molecule, so the answer C is wrong. Question 19. Diagram 13 shows a types of organism. This is the paramecium again. And this paramecium is taking in the oxygen directly from the environment. Why they can do that? Why we need the lungs to take in the oxygen? Why the paramecium? They don't need the lungs, but they can straight away take in the oxygen from the environment. There's only one reason, because they are super small and it makes their total surface area per volume ratio is super high. This is the reason. By having a high TSA per volume ratio, they are able to take in the oxygen from the environment. So let's look at the options 1. It has a small ratio, small, which is the wrong one. So answer A is not the correct answer. Has a large ratio of total surface area per volume. So this is the answer. Question 20. What equation shows oxygen depth? Oxygen depth is the condition when you are doing vigorous exercise and you use too much of oxygen until you exceed the amount of oxygen that your bodies can provide. And it will cause a condition called oxygen depth. Since this condition happens when you don't have or lack of oxygen, so this reaction will not involve any oxygen. So options A, remove. Options B, remove. Now left 2, C and D. C and D, these two reactions doesn't involve any oxygen, but look at the product. Product for option C, it produces the ethanol. What is ethanol? Ethanol is a type of alcohol. Can your body produce alcohol? No, right? So the organism that can produce alcohol is called the yeast. Human cannot produce alcohol, so this reaction also cannot happen in our body. So the final answer for this question is D. Glucose becomes lactic acid and energy. And this energy is limited energy.